loveys. How are we? Happy Saturday, November 2nd, 2024. And tonight we have come together to discuss the, as requested by your lovely votes on the community page, because I didn't even realize we could really do that. We're doing tonight Irini Scordi-Bello, the medical examiner from Commonwealth versus Karen Reed. And we've got our pearls to clutch. We've got our subtitles on, and we're going to do this at 1.5 speed because, for the love of God, we know Lally testimony and questioning, well, not testimony, his questioning is atrocious. So we've got to speed it up. Do I have humans here? Hello, loveys. Oh, Emily, I think did I give you a wrench? I have no idea. I tried. And we've got Jen K. Hello. And hi, Julie Kaylee. And Mimi. Hi. All right. And Gracie Diaz. Hi, lovey. Okay. Let's get ready to rumble. Okay. So before I get started, I just wanted to tell you guys that I got a microphone. Who do I think I am? I don't know. Okay. Can't stop, won't stop. And I'm going to try to set that up. And I got a little board that should be able to laugh. So if we're laughing, the little board should laugh. I don't friggin' know, but I'm going to try it. I'm going to get my shit together, and maybe we could do another testimony rewind tomorrow. Okay, stop it. Let's go. Oh, and we have Arkansas's. We have Shucky Ducky Quack Quack is from Arkansas. Love it. Okay, babes. Now, may the desktop force be with us and also with you. Okay, let's go.
Things shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. I do. Thank you.
Good afternoon, doctor.
Good afternoon.
All right, Mr. Lally, whenever you're ready.
Good afternoon, Doctor.
Good afternoon.
Could you please
Oh. Hello?
state your name and spell your last name for the jury?
My name is Irini Scordi-Bello. My last name is spelled Scordi-Bello.
And how are you employed, ma'am?
I am employed as a medical examiner.
Maybe I
And
don't
for
like
whom are
that.
you employed?
I'm employed by the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
Where she is.
And how long has it been that you've been medical examiner for the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner in Massachusetts?
I have been with OCME in Massachusetts since December of 2016.
Now, ma'am, if I could take you back and just ask you a few questions regarding your educational background.
Okay, let's talk a little shit just because we can. So, okay, Irini Scordi-Bello, if anybody remembers back in the olden days when I did a stream with El Jefe, Sean McDonough, and it was the medical professional show that we did. And we know that Irini Scordi-Bello worked for New York, the state of New York in the beginning, right? And she took a pay cut, guys, to come to Massachusetts, which I found a little bit, a pay cut, ma'am, clutch those pearls. And additionally, there was an incident where one of the cases she was the medical examiner on, she had stated that it was a child, and I believe that they were in federal custody, or not federal custody, but like state custody. And this little baby ended up passing away from a pneumonia. And they charged the foster parents criminally. It went all the way up to the Supreme Court of the state, and it got overturned. And it said that her medical examination and determination was questionable. That's all I'll say there. We'll do research and we'll talk about it more. It was very, very sad, an incredibly sad case all around, though.
Background work history a little bit prior to working at the OCME in Massachusetts. If I could start with your undergraduate work, as far as where did you go and what, if anything, did you receive a degree?
I completed a bachelor's degree in microbiology at the University of California.
And after receiving that degree, where did you go from?
I went on to the University of Miami, where I completed my doctorate degree in immunology. And following that, I moved up to New York City, where I went to medical school. I completed 4 years of medical school at the Mount Sinai School of Medicine. And following medical school, I completed 3 years of pathology residency at the Mount Sinai Hospital.
And then following your
Sorry, babes, just wanted to say Mount Sinai, incredibly big school, great hospital, teaching hospital, and like one of the top in the country. Like, granted, we in Massachusetts, Mass General, Brigham and Women's, BMC, we're very spoiled, right? Like with our hospitals, but in New York, they have incredible hospitals too. Mount Sinai is one of them.
your residency at Mount Sinai, where did you go from there?
And from there, I went downtown in New York City, and I completed a 1-year fellowship in forensic pathology at the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner for the City of New York.
And following that 1-year fellowship there, where did you go from there?
I worked in New York City until 2016 when I moved here to Massachusetts.
Now, are you board certified?
Yes, I am.
What are you board certified in?
I'm board certified in anatomic pathology and forensic pathology.
And if you could explain to the jury just briefly, what does it mean?
Okay, we're going to go back in time, babes. And remember Dr. Stonebridge, our quadruple board certified medical examiner. And then we have Irini Scordi-Bello. She is double board certified. Very impressive.
To be board certified and sort of what is entailed in that process?
Board certification is actually a voluntary process that a physician decides to go through. It involves completing an accredited program in the specialty of choice. In my case, it was pathology and forensic pathology, and then completing a number of requirements, as well as taking and successfully passing exams, and then being able to say that you're board certified.
And is that certification at this time, is that up to date?
Yes.
Now, with regard to the time that you've been working as a forensic pathologist, are there any organizations that you belong to in relation to your work in that field?
Yes, I am a member of the National Association of Medical Examiners.
And that's an acronym as far as name.
Name.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, with respect to that time frame as well, what, if any, experience do you have in regard to teaching the areas related to your field?
I have always been interested in teaching. I started teaching as a pathology resident, teaching other residents and medical students. And during my time in New York City, I enjoyed teaching medical students and residents. We had a very active education program in New York City. So I've always been involved with teaching both pathology and forensic pathology.
Now, to those terms themselves, if I could ask you briefly just to describe to the jury as far as pathology in general sense, what does pathology mean?
Pathology is a specialty of medicine, and pathology looks at disease processes and as well as trauma and the effect they have on the human body.
And what is forensic pathology?
Forensic pathology looks at disease processes and injuries in the human body and tries to determine the cause of death in deceased individuals.
And as far as anatomic pathology, what exactly is that?
Anatomic pathology, as opposed to clinical pathology, is it has to do with any organ that is in the body, versus clinical pathology that deals with fluids and blood analysis and things like that. So anatomic pathology, a lot of anatomic pathologists are surgical pathologists. That's another term that you will hear. These are pathologists in the hospital that look at tissues under the microscope, and they come to a diagnosis, whether something is benign or malignant. And forensic pathology takes anatomic pathology to another step, to another level, by looking at the whole body and trying to determine the cause of death instead of organ specific. Instead of just looking at one organ, forensic pathology looks at the whole body.
Now, you're also familiar through your work and training experience in regard to forensic pathology with a term called autopsy.
Yes.
And is that something that typically you
hope,
would do
Lally.
in the case of sort of your investigation and your analysis in regard to a pathological analysis when it came to a body or a patient that comes in?
Yes, an autopsy is a procedure that we do to determine the cause and manner of death.
And so, doctor, with respect to an autopsy, may be a term that's pretty well understood.
Oh, let's just talk a wee bit of shit about the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and their autopsies that they have been doing and have had serious concerns in the last, I'd say 10 years. It's about 3 times, babes, that we have almost lost our accreditation. Shut your mouth, clutch those pearls. Okay, so what the problem is that the OCME has been having a really hard time in turning around autopsies in the amount of time that you are supposed to. You, in theory, have 30 days from the time you receive the cadaver or the unalive human, and until you are supposed to provide that final report. There have been multiple physicians and cases that were so backlogged that they were doing things over a year old. Crazy. Now, this was before the pandemic, so you can't say it was just pandemic related, but also in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, standard throughout the country, they are doing between 30 and 40% of all unattended deaths, right? Well, no, that need to be completed an autopsy. You want to have around 33 to 35% that are typically done per state. The Commonwealth is at least 10% under that. They're usually around 20-something%. And the scariest thing of all, babes, is there is 11% of autopsies that are completed in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts that are chart review alone. Let me say that one more time for the people in the back. Chart review alone. So if somebody was in a hospital, if they were in a SNF or a skilled nursing facility, wherever they are, they're looking at those notes and and doing what they call like a chart review autopsy. I blacked out when I found out that 11% were doing that. Also, sorry, one more thing is that Irini Scordi-Bello did 9 days of work up in New Hampshire back in 2022, and she got like $16,000 from Governor Sununu because she did eight or nine contracted days. And I was like, but you guys can't even keep up with your own workload and your regularly scheduled autopsies, yet you're going to help with U.S. services up in New Hampshire. I found that very interesting. It's all public record. Go look it up. Okay, love you. Let's go.
Understood, but if you could explain in general terms, as far as when a body or a patient comes in to the OCME, as far as what is an autopsy, what is involved in it, and sort of what does that consist of?
Yes. When a case, a death is first reported to the medical examiner's office, we make a determination as to whether that death falls under our jurisdiction. Cases that fall under the jurisdiction of the medical examiner include all violent deaths, all deaths that are due to not natural causes, all accidents, intoxications, deaths of babies and children, and deaths in individuals that were not under the care of a physician when the death occurred. So once a case is accepted and it falls under our jurisdiction, it is given a numerical number, and then the body is transported from either the location of the death or the hospital to our facility. Our facilities, we have 3 facilities in the state of Massachusetts. Once the body comes to our facility, then there are a number of steps that are taken. The body is processed. What that means is that their pictures are taken, a weight is taken, a height is taken, everything is input into our computer system, and then a determination is made as to whether an autopsy is required in order for us to determine the cause and manner of death. If the answer is yes, then we proceed with the autopsy.
Now, as far as an autopsy is concerned, there are two sort of primary components of that as far as an external examination and an internal examination. Is that correct?
Yes.
And can you describe to the jury, in general terms, sort of what the process is in reference to both external and internal?
Yes. So the autopsy or the postmortem examination has two main parts. The first one is the external exam, and it is basically what it sounds like. We do a very thorough.
Leah, pardon me, I apologize. Oh, not okay. So 90 days, but don't we have didn't we have like a huge backlog? And why did I think 30 days? I don't know. Maybe I was thinking of like high profile cases because I know that they try to get them done within a 30-day, but they do have that 90-day window. But they still were unable to get they weren't able to get these autopsies completed within 90 days and having such backlogs. That's wild. But thank you, Leah M. I appreciate you.
Exam of the outside of the body. We document physical characteristics, eye color, hair color. We document any scars or tattoos that may be on the body. We take pictures. We make notes. We look for any signs of disease and any signs of injury. All that is, as I mentioned, documented. And once we're, during the external examination, sometimes we will take evidence. We will collect hair and nails from the body if we think that is necessary or warranted. And once the external examination is done, then we proceed to the internal examination.
Sorry, babes, just wanted to stop right there when she's talking about, oh, I did you dirty, Irini. I would never do that to you. I apologize. Babe, let me go a little further. Oh, okay. You're a woman of the hour. Okay. So listen, when she just said that sometimes we collect evidence, right? She's talking about fingernail clippings. She's talking about that, etc., right? But very, very important that we all understand as viewers that the Office of Chief Medical Examiner is an arm of Mass State Police. I want you to hear that. I want you to feel that in your soul and understand that there is no independent investigation or like any kind of review other than what Mass State Police provides. Now, the former Mass Bar Association, the head of that, he has been asking for like 40 years for there to be a separation of church and state, if you will, or ME and state, if you will, because there should be able to be a complete forensic and evidentiary review from the Office of Chief Medical Examiner in addition to Mass State Police. Because if not, babes, what happens? We get text messages from certain people. I don't know, maybe his name is Trooper Proctor, who send things to their buddies like DeChico and Buchanan and say, you know, I had a meeting with Irini Scordi-Bello and she's still not giving us the homicide designation. Which to me, let's be perfectly clear, I don't like men being shitheads and writing, you know, that you're a see you next Tuesday or that you are, you know, talking about your medical diseases, wishing death upon people. Very, very fucked up. But the most egregious thing that I saw in those text messages with Trooper Proctor was specifically an attempt to coerce a Massachusetts medical examiner to change not the cause of death, because that was determined by her, but the manner of death, which she never did. Officer John O'Keefe's death certificate still remains undetermined to this day.
Involves making surgical type cuts on the body, what's known as the Y incision that goes from shoulder to shoulder and down the middle of the body, and the organs of the neck, the chest, the abdomen are examined thoroughly, again, looking for and documenting signs of disease or signs of injury. We do the same thing with the head. The head is open, the brain is removed, and we document any disease or injury.
Now, turning your attention to January 31st, 2022, did you have occasion to perform an autopsy in regard to a patient or a body of John O'Keefe?
I did.
January
And do you recall
31st,
which
babes.
you mentioned there were 3 different offices of the chief medical examiner within the state of Massachusetts, correct?
Yes, it was in the Cape Cod office.
Is that the office that you typically work out of?
No, that's not the office I typically work out of. My permanent position is in the Westfield office in Western Massachusetts. I was covering the office.
We know, guys, that Irini Scordi-Bello typically works out of Westfield, as she just said, which is the office that our baby, who we still don't know, Enrique Delgado Garcia, what his autopsy results were. But I digress. Continue, Irini.
Office that day because we were short-staffed.
And in the reference to the autopsy that you performed with regard to Mr. O'Keefe, was that in conformity with what you were speaking about just before, generally as far as how you conduct autopsies?
Yes.
Now, during the course of the autopsy that you performed in reference to Mr. O'Keefe, during the course of the external examination, what, if anything, did you note in reference to that external examination of Mr. O'Keefe?
First, I noted that there was evidence of medical intervention. Mr. O'Keefe's body was transported to our facility from the hospital, and he had evidence of attempted resuscitation. After I documented that, I proceeded to document some injuries that I saw on Mr. O'Keefe's body.
And before we turn to that, if I could just ask you a couple more general questions. You've made some mention earlier in your testimony as far as the cause and manner of death in general. That's 2 things that you're trying to determine during any sort of forensic pathological examination, correct?
Yes.
And what I'm going to ask you first is just in reference to manner of death. Can you describe for the jury sort of what are the different types of manner of death and how are they sort of classified from a perspective from your office?
Okay. Yes. So the manner of death are the circumstances that led to the cause of death. The cause of death being the disease or the injury that initiated the sequence that led to the fatal events. So the manner of death is circumstance dependent. There are 5 general manners of death, or 5 umbrellas. The first one is natural. When we determine a manner of death to be natural, it means that the death was caused exclusively by natural disease. That would be heart disease, liver disease, cancer, aging, Alzheimer's, dementia, etc. The second manner of death is accident. That means that the cause of death was due to an injury or due to an intoxication, either a physical injury or a chemical injury. But the circumstances show little or no evidence that intoxication or that injury was intentional. So most motor vehicle accidents, most drug overdoses, most elderly falls are classified as accidents. The fatal outcome was not intentional. Homicide is a manner of death when there is injury inflicted by another person, but there is evidence that there was intent to cause fear, harm, or death to the other individual.
Babes, hold the mother humping phone. Just a reminder that Irini Scordi-Bello just told us in actually a very wonderful, beautiful, methodical, laid out depiction of what homicide is. We know homicide is death by a human at the hands of another human, whether it be any way you swipe it, credit card it, okay, it's denied. And this is very important because how in the actual fuck, sorry, pardon my French, but how do we have Karen Reed on trial for second-degree unaliving if it has not been determined that Officer John O'Keefe was unalived? Let's spin on the rings of Saturn. What are we doing? Sorry.
And suicide is due to either an injury or an intoxication. And again, the circumstances and the evidence suggest or point strongly to the fact that that was a self-inflicted, intentional act on behalf of the person with the intent to cause harm to themselves or cause death to themselves. So most hangings, intentional overdoses by prescription medications are classified as suicides. And then we have, and then we have one more manner that we call undetermined. Some jurisdictions, they call it could not be determined. That means that evidence pointing towards one set of circumstances or one manner is no more compelling than evidence pointing towards another manner of death. So if we don't have enough information to know whether something, or to be able to determine the circumstances, then we are left with an undetermined manner of death.
Now,
ding, 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 ding. Okay, here is that. That's a sound bite that we should shove up every Commonwealth supporter's ass and just put it in their stockings, okay? Right next to a lump of coal and possibly a clementine, and hope that Krampus comes to their house this year, okay? I'm going to tell you this, Bits. This was just a perfect snippet of Irini Scordi-Bello telling us what we've known all along, is that there was not enough information to determine that this was a homicide, i.e., that it was a death caused intentionally or by another human, or that it couldn't be depicted that it was accidental. There was no other classification. We know that Officer John O'Keefe, this is what we can rule out, right? Officer John O'Keefe did not inflict the injuries that he sustained that were his fatal injuries that led to his death. And we know that it was not also a natural death, because he was 46 years old and generally in good health and in good shape, and had no congenital either heart disease or a valve issue or any brain aneurysm. Nothing was noted that would determine that Officer John O'Keefe shouldn't have been here on January 30th, 2022. Wild.
am I correct in stating that the cause of death is something that's more like a medical determination? Is that correct?
Yes, the cause.
So watch the leading questions, Mr. Elliott. Sustain.
How would you characterize the determination that you make in regard to a cause of death?
The cause of death is based on my findings at the time of autopsy, along with any medical information that I may have on that deceased individual.
Now, as far as the manner of death, how are you making that determination?
The manner of death, as I mentioned, is circumstance dependent. I make that determination based on investigative information that is provided to me by law enforcement, by the people who did the investigation.
Ooh. Oh, so we're just waiting on, okay, so we get an additional information for the manner of death that is provided to her by the police officers or the investigation that is done. Again, babes, it's because there is no investigation completed by the Office of Chief Medical Examiner. Stop it. Shut your mouth. Anywho, Irini Scordi-Bello, I want to say this. I didn't like the line that was put into Officer John O'Keefe's filings by the Commonwealth, where it said there was no signs of physical altercation. Yeah, no signs of physical altercation or fight. Okay, that was the one line. Now we know that we remember from testimony, even I'm jumping ahead, we know that she walks that back. But I have to say, how proud are we of Dr. Irini Scordi-Bello that she held the line. She held the line for science. She held the line for, you're not going to tell me that this was a motor vehicle accident, a pedestrian strike, because that is not what I'm seeing. I'm not jiving with that. Now, had they gone to her and said, hey, Dr. Irini Scordi-Bello, we believe that this was a domestic that went wrong, and this was, blunt force trauma to the head from a fight or a physical altercation, perhaps she would have provided that designation of homicide.
And what, if any, legal determination are you making as far as when you classify something as either of those 5 categories in a manner of death?
I am not making a legal determination. I'm making a medical determination.
And so as far as the medical determination is manner of death, specifically when I'm talking about something that could be ruled or listed as manner of death as accident, is that, what if anything, what if any determination are you making as far as that is concerned?
I'm making the determination that the information that I have either shows no evidence or very little evidence that the injury that led to the cause of death was intentional. So I don't have any information to suggest that that was an intentional act.
And am I correct in saying that routinely people charged with, say, motor vehicle homicides, it gets
Hello, IYKYK. Very nice to see you. Thank you very much. I'm so sorry when I'm doing the testimony, I just will go through and do the super chats at the end, but this is a good question. Did she hold the line or sit on the fence? Now, really, really good question. And do I know? No, absolutely. But she did the right thing by not being forced, even though there were 2 different meetings that she had with Proctor and Buchanan, and she still refused to change the designation. And as much as it kind of, we would have liked somebody to say like, hey, push back here and say, this does not align. This is not at all what I think actually medically occurred. You're right. But at the end of the day, she didn't give in. And my concern is, babes, is that if we looked at the Commonwealth and we went back in the hands of time, when you think about Sandra Birchmore, babes, that the medical examiner in her case said that it was a self-checkout, and it was clearly not, as evidenced by fracturing to her hyoid bone. That does not happen from partial weight-bearing hangings. Okay, it doesn't happen. It happens in how many? 0 out of 100 with partial weight bearing unalivings. So that was so wild. But the Mass State Police encouraged her to say, this is what we found, this is what happened, and that's where she went, because she went solely on their evidence. And what made me even more sick, specifically in Sandra Birchmore's case, was I said maybe she missed it. Maybe she didn't see that hyoid. She documented it. She saw that with her own eyeballs and still ruled that a self-checkout. Now we have an additional two medical examiners, one hired by the family, who Dr. Baden, and the other one hired by the feds. Okay. And both of them came out that it was a homicide by strangulation. So yes, possibly fence sitting, but wow, like had this got a homicide ruling, I feel as though there would have been quite more joy and not joy, but like elation on the side of the Commonwealth to say, we've got it and we're going to continue to shove it down your throat.
Classified as a manner of death as accident, correct?
Objection. Sustained.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
Doctor, I'm showing you the documents, ask you to review it, look up when we're finished.
Yes,
And do you recognize that document, Doctor?
I do.
And what do you recognize that to be?
This is a copy of the death certificate for Mr. John O'Keefe.
That's signed by yourself, is that correct?
Correct.
And as far as the listing related to cause of death, what did you list as cause of death on Mr. O'Keefe with regard to his death certificate?
Cause of death was blunt impact injuries of head and hypothermia.
And with reference to manner of death, what, if anything, did you list on Mr. O'Keefe's death certificate in relation to manner of death?
I listed could not be determined.
And as far as that listing for could not be determined, if you could explain to the jury why it was that you have that listed as a manner of death with relation to Mr. O'Keefe.
Again, the cause of death is something that I can determine by the autopsy. I did the autopsy on Mr. O'Keefe and determined that he had injuries to his head as well as signs of hypothermia.
Mhm.
So the combination of those two was the cause of death.
Lethal.
The manner of death has to do with the circumstances under which Mr. O'Keefe sustained those injuries.
Woo.
And I did not have enough information to be able to determine whether those injuries were accidental or not. And so my manner of death was undetermined or could not be determined.
Look at her body
Just
language.
from the spectrum that you had just talked about, sort of the 5 different manners of death.
I also, sorry, babes. I just wanted to say, look at her body language, because at first I was like, Irini Scordi-Bello. I was like, doctor, quick question. Are we keeping you awake when she does the eye closes, when she's giving her, answers? But at the end of the day, she is so in the zone, and she is actually being, I feel that she gets more confident as she continues to go and continues to provide her rationale, in my opinion.
Fair to say, did you not determine that this was either suicide or natural causes, correct?
Correct.
And so as far as your determination of manner of death being could not be determined, which of the two were you sort of in between?
The two manners of death that remain are accident and homicide.
Your Honor, may I approach?
Yes.
I want to seek to introduce in a minute the next exhibit. Now, Dr. Scordi-Bello, you had made reference as far as cause of death being a blunt force injury. Is that correct?
Correct.
At least one of the contributing causes. If you could explain to the jury sort of what you understand that to mean as far as what is a blunt force injury.
Blunt force injuries are caused by any blunt object. That is a very big category of objects. A microphone could be a blunt object. This bottle, if heavy enough, could be a blunt object. The ground can be a blunt object. So anything that doesn't have a sharp edge or a razor edge, not a knife, not a scalpel, is a blunt object. Blunt impact injuries are categorized into contusions, which are bruises, abrasions, which are scratches, fractures, which are a break in the bone, and lacerations, which are tears in the skin. So when we say blunt impact injuries, we could be referring to any of those or a combination of those 4 types. And all those are the result of impact of the body with a blunt object.
Now, we'll get more into specifics in a moment, just in general terms as far as from your external examination of Mr. O'Keefe's body, whereabouts sort of geographically on the body did you observe these blunt force injuries?
The majority of the blunt force injuries were to the face and the head, as well as to the upper extremities, the arms.
Now, starting with Mr. O'Keefe's head, what was it specifically, or where was it that you observed blunt force injuries to Mr. O'Keefe's head?
Okay. I observed a number of different injuries on Mr. O'Keefe's head, starting with his eyes.
Oh, okay. We're going to slow this down, babes. Oh, we got to slow it back down to normal just so that we can listen intently to her discuss what injuries were sustained to Officer John O'Keefe's head.
He had hemorrhage or bleeding on the upper eyelids of both eyes, as well as swelling of the eyes. He had a small laceration, a small tear in the skin on the right eyelid, again associated with the bleeding. He had some abrasions. Abrasions are superficial scratches on the skin on the left side of his nose, I believe. And when I looked at the back of Mr. O'Keefe's head, he had a laceration. It's a tear in the skin that was surrounded, or it was associated with an abrasion, a scrape.
What?
Now, in terms of the extremities, and I'll start with upper extremities as far as his arms, what, if anything, did you observe in regard to blunt impact injuries to his arms?
He had on the right upper extremity, he had a number of somewhat linear, somewhat patterned abrasions, scrapes, varying sizes, ranging from small.
Okay, I just noticed this, babes. She just said somewhat linear, somewhat patterned abrasions and scrapes on his arm. Let's talk about what would make a linear patterned abrasion and scrape and what would not. What would, okay, for example, right behind me, okay, best little girl in the whole wide world. Her name is Clobard, okay? Chloe, potentially, any doggy. We could have little Mickey the Golden Doodle. We could have Kino the Shiba Inu. You could have any animal that could cause linear pattern abrasions to your upper extremity. You know what wouldn't cause patterned linear abrasions? A combustible taillight. Polycarbonate being shattered does not make linear patterned abrasions. Check for Nurse Kim.
Uh, 2 to 3 millimeters to, I believe, 5 or 6 centimeters, both on the upper arm and part of his forearm. He had some contusions or some bruising on the dorsal aspect of the right hand that I measured and documented. He had some other, he had a very small abrasion, I believe, on the lower extremities near the right knee, but I would have to look at my notes to be absolutely.
Remember, babes, okay, is that we know that the little in front of his right knee, the little puncture that was from his IO, the interosseous that was applied in the field, because Officer John O'Keefe never got a peripheral line. He did not have an IV started in his hand. Why? Because he didn't have a heartbeat, and 2, he was hypothermic, and he had a core body temp of 80 degrees. So in what world would you think I'm going to be able to start an IV in someone's hand, never even mind an antecubital, like pretend somebody started at the furthest, the most distal part of your body, right? And farthest away from your heart and your organs, that you would go into survival mode and just try to at least keep pumping through this. You vasoconstrict, okay?
Sure.
You can go ahead and look at your notes anytime you need to, doctor.
I can
Okay?
go into my notes?
Yes.
Okay.
Very true.
So as far as his extremities, I noted a 3 centimeter superficial abrasion to his right medial upper arm. That would be the medial aspect, would be the inner aspect of the right arm. I noted the abrasions on his posterior right arm and forearm. Those ranged from 3 millimeters to up to 7 centimeters. I noted 2 red contusions on the dorsal aspect of the right hand. Again, that's the back of the hand. A faint abrasion, a faint scratch on the dorsal aspect of the left hand, and a small 0.5 centimeter abrasion on his.
What? What? Loveys, alarms, ring the alarms, ding, 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 ding. I don't recall anybody saying that Officer John O'Keefe had any faint abrasions on his left dorsal aspect of his left hand. What would that be more in line with? Clearly, could be, not saying it is, but I'm saying it makes more sense that that would be defensive. Wow.
His right lateral knee on the side of his knee, on the right side.
Now, I think you've defined it fairly well so far, but I'm just going to ask you, just for delineation purposes, if you could explain to the jury sort of what is the difference between an abrasion versus a contusion versus a laceration.
Okay. An abrasion is a scrape. It's a scrape of the superficial layers of the skin. A contusion is a bruise. So if I hit myself hard enough on my nightstand, and I break blood vessels in under the skin, then I can end up with a bruise or a contusion. A laceration is a tear,
Huge, Britt.
not necessarily a cut. There's a distinction between a cut and a tear. A tear in the skin is due to a blunt object, maybe the corner of the nightstand that's sharp enough to tear my skin, but not so sharp as a blade that would actually cut the skin smoothly. So we differentiate between lacerations and cuts because cuts are due to sharp objects, lacerations are due to blunt objects. And fractures are basically a break in the bone, again, due to blunt trauma.
Are you familiar with what is termed as an incised wound?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Incised, I-N-C-I.
Incised, yes.
If you could explain the difference between sort of the mechanism and sort of what you observe between a laceration and an incised wound.
Yes. So an incised wound is what I previously called a cut. So the analogy I like to give is if you have a loaf of bread and you're trying to cut the bread. If you take a very good bread knife, sharp knife, you will be able to smoothly cut the bread. If you take a hammer, which is a blunt object, and you try to cut the bread, you're going to shred it up. So an incised wound is a smooth cut. Knives, razors will cause incised wounds on the skin. A blunt object will cause a laceration. It will break the skin, and the edges will not be uniform, and there might even be some bruising around it.
Thank you. Thank you, Lally, for
Now,
asking. Don't
with
cut
respect
bread
to
with
the
a
injuries,
hammer.
that you talked about as far as the abrasions on Mr. O'Keefe's right arm. How was that located in reference to sort of the circumference of the arm? And what I'm asking there is, was it on top, on the bottom, or everywhere?
I describe them as being on the posterior right arm and forearm. So when we examine a body, we examine the body in what's known as the anatomic position, which is the body on the table with the palms upwards. And so the posterior right arm and forearm would be what would be facing the table as the body is laying on the table, the backside of the arm and the forearm.
So the opposite of posterior would be what?
Would be anterior, and it would be this area right here that points up.
And as far
or
as
forward.
the anterior of Mr. O'Keefe's right arm, what, if anything, did you observe as far as injuries there?
I noted in my diagrams and my charts that they were mostly on the posterior right arm and forearm.
Now, Dr. Scordi-Bello, if I could turn your attention to the internal examination as far as the injuries that you observed there, what, if anything, did you observe during the course of your internal examination of Mr. O'Keefe?
Okay, the internal examination, I will start with the head. Once the skull was open and the head was examined. I noted that there were skull fractures in Mr. O'Keefe's skull, both in the back and the front aspect of his skull. I noted that there was recent subdural hemorrhage. That is blood that is under the dura, and the dura is a very tough protective cover that sits over the brain.
And subarachnoid.
I noted that there was subarachnoid hemorrhage.
Oh.
That's hemorrhage that is directly on top of the brain under the leptomeninges, which is a very thin membrane that covers the brain. And at that point, I removed the brain, and I instead of examining it right then and there, I saved it in a special solution, and I sent it to our office in Boston for a neuropathologist to fully examine.
Our
Is
green
it your
sleeve
understanding that a
queen.
neuropathologist ultimately conducted a fuller examination of Mr. O'Keefe's brain?
Yes,
And who was that neuropathologist within your office?
Dr. Stonebridge.
Now, with reference to the head, as far as the skull, you indicated that there were fractures as in plural, correct?
Yes.
And
Important.
with reference to the fractures, what, if any, relationship did you know between the fractures that you observed and the laceration to the back of Mr. O'Keefe's head that you spoke about in your external examination?
So the laceration on the scalp that I observed was overlying the area of the skull that appeared to be fractured, or at least appeared that the fractures were originating from that point of impact and extending into the rest of the skull.
Now, one of anything as far as your observations of the skull on that point in the, I'm sorry, which part of the skull was the originating fracture?
This would be on the back of the skull, slightly right of midline.
Okay. So, babes, listen, right occiput, she's saying that where our 2.5 inch laceration was to Officer John O'Keefe's skull. To his skin, right? Which was the opening of the skin. And then he had an originating fracture per Dr. Scordi-Bello, okay? That this originating fracture is where the point of impact was. Now, could frozen ground cause you to have not only skull fracture all the way in the back of your skull, but to also radiate all the way to the thinnest, bones underneath the base of your orbits, your eyes? I don't think so. But let's hear what our little closed-eyed princess is going to tell us, because the condition of Officer John O'Keefe's brain, which was the only part of his body that was reviewed and, completed, dissected by Dr. Renee Stonebridge, she painted a picture of such horrific brain damage all the way to his midbrain. His brain stem had herniated and was coming out the magnum forum at the end base, right? That it was pushing and pressing. That he had such trauma and significant brain damage that I'm going to tell you this, babes, going from this position, standing up at 6'2", 217 pounds, being sideswiped by a motor vehicle, spun counterclockwise, and to land on frozen ground without there being a boulder with like, I don't know, protruding some sort of jagged edge, this boulder with a jagged edge and a knife. Okay, I don't know how you make that make sense, but I digress. Keep going, Irini. Open your eyes, lovey, whenever you can.
Is that the medical term that's referred to as?
I'm sorry?
Is there a medical term that's referred to as far as the right rear sort of?
It's the right occipital.
And What, if anything, led you to that opinion that that was sort of the originating source of the multiple fractures in the skull that you observed?
Again, observing or looking at the skull fractures and their pattern, there appeared to be
Misty and Eddie, call me.
a central point with fractures radiating or originating from that central point and going into other parts of the skull.
Now, in reference to that fracture in the back of the skull, what, if anything, did you determine in regard to impact in regard to that area of the head?
Well, the laceration along with, so the tear in the skin along with the scrape, because they were adjacent, are both evidence of blunt impact. So I knew at that point that Mr. O'Keefe's head had come in contact with a blunt object.
Would that be sort of the point of impact between the blunt object and Mr. O'Keefe's head?
Right.
Now, with reference to the fractures that you would observed, how extensive were the fractures that you observed, the multiple ones?
Well, there were multiple fractures.
I'm sorry, I can't stop. Hashtag can't stop, won't stop. Listen to me. Okay. So, yes, she is saying that there was absolutely impact to the back of Officer John O'Keefe's head. She states that that is the originating fracture that then had radiating fractures that radiated outward towards the front of his head. But, babes, what was the question that was asked by Lally? He said, was that the fracture? Bah, bah, bah. But he didn't say, was that the only point of impact fracture? I'm going to tell you this. The more I rehear Lally's testimony, I think he wanted me to be in a coma. Okay. I think he wanted me to be, dazing out, pretending like, I'm on Mortal Kombat and I'm one punch away from finish him. Like, what are we doing? He had me on the edge of Scorpio for far too long. Okay. But the questions he asked were incredibly deliberate. And I find him a little bit of a clever fox that I didn't during initial trial. Well, I mean, I know he's smart. I'm not trying to take anything away from him, but sly with these questions.
So by definition, multiple fractures in multiple chambers or parts of the skull. So I would say they were extensive.
You have a moment, Sharon?
Yes.
Now, when you're conducting this internal examination, is there sort of a division of the body that you're doing as far as what you're examining and in what order and sort of things that you're looking at from the internal examination?
Well, we examine everything, and usually we start in the external examination. We start from the head and work our way down. During the internal examination, we're doing two things at the same time sometimes, and so I start with the chest, move to the abdomen, and then the pelvis, while at the same time we're working on the head.
All right. I'm going to pause you there for a minute. We're going to take a short recess and we'll be back.
Oh, for old time's sake, loveys. It's the only fan. Woo! I've missed you. The cure to insomnia. Listen to Adam Lally and also just have that spinning 1993 fan, okay? Bringing us all the hits from the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Thank you, Delilah. Okay. Oh. Sorry, babes. And anytime now, Irini. Desktop, don't fail me now. Oh, Susanna, won't you cry for me? Here we go. Oh, thanks, Donna Gardner. Loving you in Nebraska. God, Bev got a blowout that day too.
Thank you, BC. Go back to
All right, Mr. Lally.
Now, doctor, as far as the internal examination was concerned with regard to Mr. O'Keefe, starting with his stomach, what, if anything, did you observe of any significance in that area?
I observed that there were some small hemorrhages, small areas of bleeding in Mr. O'Keefe's stomach.
And are those described in medical literature as a specific type of spot?
They have a name. They're called Wisniewski spots. Wishnewski. And they have been associated with cases of hypothermia.
And how so? How have they been associated with cases of hypothermia?
They have been seen in cases of hypothermia. It's one of the findings that supports the diagnosis of hypothermia. They are not always there, and their presence doesn't definitively diagnose hypothermia, but they are one of the findings that, if present, suggest the diagnosis of hypothermia.
And based on your training and experience, based on other types of literature that you've reviewed in regard to hypothermia, what is, as far as these Wisniewski spots, and thank you very much.
Wisniewski spots.
That until after you would say.
Say that 4 times fast.
With regard to that, what if anything does it say as far as the causality of that, or how that occurs or is related to hypothermia?
We don't really know the pathophysiology of these spots. There have been various hypotheses. People have suggested that they are a response to stress. Some people have suggested that hypothermia increases secretion of acid in the stomach, and that leads to these spots, but their exact pathophysiology is still under investigation.
Now, in addition to these areas of small hemorrhage in Mr. O'Keefe's stomach, what, if anything, did you observe in the pancreas?
In the pancreas, I again observed.
Okay, babes, this is actually a very good point. Jeanette Lawson, in alcoholism too, okay? Huge. Because that's typically where you're going to find actually Wisniewski spots, okay? And, that's kind of like Worcestershire sauce. Like, no offense, I don't mean to be weird, but with my mouth, I can't even believe I just said that. So I am going to not say it again. But this is very interesting because there was something that our friend, Sean McDonough, El Jefe, if you will, posted the other day. And I took a screenshot of it, and I think it was in his live called the Nat Files. And this was very, very interesting. Hold, please. I want to read it exactly if I can find it. Oh gosh. All right, I'm going to let her go, and then if I can find it, we'll go over it.
Some more diffuse hemorrhage of the pancreas and the tissues around it.
And same question with regard to the spots or the hemorrhages you observed in the stomach. What, if any, relationship do the hemorrhages or the bleeding in the pancreas have in relation to hypothermia?
Again, it's one of the findings that, if present, should alert the medical examiner to consider the possibility of hypothermia.
And as far as the observations that you made, as far as the hemorrhages in the stomach area, Mr. O'Keefe, and the hemorrhages in the pancreatic area, Mr. O'Keefe, the sort of juxtaposition of those, what, if any, significance did that have in regard to your hypothermic diagnosis?
When the case was called into our office and when we accepted the case, it was reported to us that this was an individual that was found in the snow, covered with snow, and it appeared that he may have been there for a period of time. So one of the questions for me as a medical examiner is to determine whether there are any signs of hypothermia in addition to what I had already observed, which was the blunt impact injuries. And the combination of the gastric, the stomach, and the pancreatic hemorrhages strongly suggested, given the circumstances and how the body was found, that hypothermia did in fact play a role in his death.
Now,
Which we knew.
probably should have asked this first as a precursor. When you use the term hypothermia, what do you understand? What does hypothermia mean from a medical diagnostic perspective?
Right, hypothermia is a term used to describe low body temperature, by definition, 35 degrees centigrade or below. And there are
95 degrees Fahrenheit.
levels of hypothermia, from mild hypothermia to severe hypothermia. It just basically means the body is losing heat faster than it can generate it.
And typically, what would be the sort of core body temperature that would determine someone is hypothermic versus not?
We're usually at 98 degrees or 37 degrees centigrade. So anything higher than that is considered a fever or hyperthermia. Anything lower than 35 degrees centigrade or 95 degrees Fahrenheit is considered hypothermia.
Now, if you could explain to the jury sort of a little bit about the type of diagnosis that is involved in hypothermia, and sort of what other sort of types of information you would be looking at in order to make that diagnosis.
Hypothermia is a difficult diagnosis to make, and sometimes it's a diagnosis of exclusion, meaning that all other possible causes of death have been ruled out and you're left with hypothermia. So a body that is found in the snow or in a cold environment and has a core body temperature of 85 degrees and is unresponsive or asystolic, meaning that there is no heart activity, could be a hypothermic death, or it could not be a hypothermic death. And it's up to us to determine by doing the autopsy what other factors are at play. So the example I like to give is a person with severe coronary artery disease goes out to shovel their driveway, suffers a heart attack, and drops to the ground and is dead within seconds. And no one discovers their body for a few hours during the storm. When they're found, they're asystolic, their core body temperature is 80 degrees, but the autopsy shows another reason for their death. It shows a massive heart attack, which is what killed them. They just happened to be outside after they died and they lost heat and their body temperature dropped. Doesn't mean they died from hypothermia. However, if you take a person, an elderly person, or any person, an intoxicated person, a person who is intoxicated with drugs, that goes out into bad weather, gets confused, loses their direction, isn't able to get to shelter, and they die, their body temperature starts to drop, they get more disoriented, they get more confused, their organ systems start to shut down, and eventually they die from hypothermia. So that person will also be found in the snow with a core body temperature of 80, 85 degrees. But when we do the autopsy, if we see those gastric hemorrhages, if we see that bleeding in the stomach, if we see the bleeding in the pancreas, if we look at their toxicology and we see that they were intoxicated with multiple substances, then we can determine, or we can opine, that the cause of death was at least partly due to the hypothermia, because they were still alive when they started losing heat, as opposed to someone who had the heart attack and was already dead when they started losing heat from the body.
I just wanted to bring up, Babs, that this is a big deal. This specific example that she is talking about somebody who becomes disoriented, is unable to find their way, and then, lays down and succumbs to injury. Listen, upcoming next, I hope that she's going to talk about the vitreous humor and what Officer John O'Keefe's alcohol ETOH level was post-mortem.
Doctor, when coming to your opinion in relation to the cause of death of Mr. O'Keefe, in addition to your autopsy, your internal, your external examination, what, if any, other materials were you provided, and what, if any, other materials did you review in relation?
I was provided with a police report, an investigative report. I was provided with some of his prior medical records. I was provided with records from the hospital where he was first taken.
Cousin, let me tell you something. First of all, that's a hit. That's a hit that is going to be on a Casey Kasem Kiss 108, okay? Incredible new song that Auntie Deb put out today. And also Auntie Deb did a TikTok of Nurse Kim clutching her pearls and finding a little something in her pocket that sometimes we know the Commonwealth finds. I can't wait for Thanksgiving, babe.
By emergency medical personnel. And during the course of the autopsy, of course, I didn't mention this. We also, during the autopsy, collect fluids from the body that are sent to the lab for toxicologic analysis. And after a few weeks after the autopsy, we get a report from the toxicology lab. And in this case, I looked at the toxicology report. As I mentioned, all the information from the investigators,
Okay, this is big doings, babe. Listen to this.
the autopsy findings, the neuropathology findings, and came to a conclusion as to the cause.
Now, as part of the documentation that you received from the investigators, did that include photographs of the scene as well?
Yes, it did. Some photographs.
Oh, wow. Some photographs.
Turning back to the toxicological findings that you received, what, if any, indication did those findings have, or did they indicate in regard to blood alcohol concentration with regard to Mr.
I found 3 pieces of tail light last Wednesday.
Mr. O'Keefe had alcohol in his system, and I do believe, I don't have the toxicology in front of me, but
Find it.
in his blood at the time of autopsy, the level was 0.21 grams per deciliter.
Now,
I want everyone to collectively clutch our pearls. Irini Scordi-Bello is telling us, Dr. Irini Scordi-Bello has just told us that post-mortem toxicology came back for fluids, right? This is our clinical pathology, came back with a 0.21. That is after death, that Officer John O'Keefe's blood was almost 3 times a normal legal limit. Well, a legal limit to drive a vehicle. But 0.21, and wait till we hear about what is behind his eyes, and his vitreous humor was even higher. Okay? This is to the point where it is a little bit concerning that there could have been alcohol poisoning, and like very concerned about Officer John O'Keefe's state with this level of alcohol in his blood. Okay. And when she discussed that he could have potentially become disoriented and not found his way, or she didn't say it was him, but she said in hypothermia, you can become disoriented. That example stuck with me throughout her testimony. I found it to be very, very pertinent information. And there is a reason she specifically said that, guys.
Contained within those toxicology findings, there's also something listed as a vitreous humor. Is that correct?
Yes.
And can you explain to the jury sort of what that is, where that sample is taken from, and why?
Yeah, that sample, the vitreous humor, is taken from the back chamber of the eye. It's one of the routine samples that we take in addition to blood from the body and urine. And it's, again, used to look for the presence of different drugs. In cases of alcohol intoxication, sometimes we will get a value for the vitreous, and sometimes that value might not be exactly the same as the value that we get for the blood. It gives us an idea of where in the curve of alcohol metabolism, the individual is.
And so based on sort of the disparity between the vitreous humor level and the, I'm sorry, I may not have asked, what was the level in the vitreous humor?
I believe it was higher.
What?
Sorry, I just have to find it. I think it was 0.26. I'm sorry, I can't find it in these notes. I don't know if you have the.
John, may I approach?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, copy of the toxicology.
Yes. It was 0.28.
0.28.
Now, doctor,
Okay. So Officer John O'Keefe's vitreous humor is over 3 times the legal limit. And as we see his blood, his BAC, his actual blood draw, that was at 0.21. Okay. So we know that he was at the curve of he's more intoxicated, and then was on his way down of metabolism when he did expire, AKA pass away. That is bananas intoxicated. Okay? Like, I have this little diagram. I should post it. I'll post it on our site, guys, like on the community page. And it talks about, what part of your body starts to like shut down, what senses are impacted and affected until you become at risk of alcohol poisoning and even worse, okay, that you could be put into coma and death, okay, due to alcohol and ETOH. It is very deadly when you start to get into these high numbers, okay? So we remember the next morning, approximately 9 o'clock in the morning, allegedly, Karen Reed's BAC is 0.08, okay? And Officer John O'Keefe passed away around that same time. God bless him. He's pronounced at 7:50 a.m. So we know at some point he was 0.28 was the highest level of his intoxication. And by the time he had expired or passed away, it had metabolized down out to 0.21. Still nearly 3 times the legal limit. And, who cares? He wasn't, like you're saying, he was, oh, well, of course, everyone cares. But I'm saying, who cares? He wasn't driving. But that is a big deal. And it was not brought up, in my opinion, or discussed by anybody, how entirely muffed up he was that night.
with respect to the disparity between what was contained as BAC and the vitreous humor versus the other number from his blood, what, if anything, does that indicate to you as far as, or what, if anything, do you take from it?
That suggests that the level in Mr. O'Keefe's blood had been higher than 0.21, and that's reflected by the 0.28 that was in the vitreous. The vitreous metabolism of alcohol lags. It's a little slower, lags behind that of the blood and the circulation. The alcohol is metabolized in the liver, but the fact that it is higher in the vitreous suggests that the level in the blood was also higher at some point prior.
So at some points, whenever Mr. O'Keefe died, his level of alcohol was on the decrease. Is that fair to say?
Correct.
Now, with respect to, you mentioned that you had reviewed the EMS reports for Mr. O'Keefe as well as his medical records from Good Samaritan. Is that correct?
Correct.
And if you could just briefly for the jury explain your understanding as far as some of the terms within those medical records.
Interesting comment, Dina Bellina. Very interesting comment. Makes no sense. He walked out of the bar and wasn't stumbling with that level. Now, I'm just speculating here, babes, but maybe, just maybe, Officer John O'Keefe didn't have his last drink at the bar. Maybe, just maybe, Karen Reed was telling the truth. And she saw him walk in. I don't know.
Familiar with your review of Mr. O'Keefe's medical records that he was labeled as being in cardiac arrest?
Yes.
And can you explain to the jury what that is?
Yes, he was labeled as asystolic or in asystole, which is basically a flat line. So if you attach leads to the body, there is no electrical activity coming from the heart.
Now, with respect to Mr. O'Keefe, as far as certain vital signs were taken in the course of his treatment at the Good Samaritan, is that correct?
Yes.
Including a core temperature, is that correct?
Yes.
Would you recall what that core temperature was?
Yes. It was noted as 80.1.
And that was a temperature reading that was taken at 7:19 a.m., is that correct?
He's muted. Sorry, guys. Absolutely. If you know, you know. Keep in mind that KR only went there because John wanted a DD. Well, yes, and that he had gone out and knew that he was going to have Karen drive him home because his friend, his really good friend, Michael Camerano, they had moved his car, and then you saw him get into Mike's car, and then we saw the text messages where he said, "You're my D, you are going to be driving me."
It was taken, actually, this temperature reading in the records that I'm looking at was taken at 6:57 a.m.
And with respect to that 80.1 degree temperature, that's in Fahrenheit, is that correct?
Yes.
And so what, if any, relationship does that have, or what, if any, relationship does that have to your hypothermic diagnosis?
Well, that is the temperature. At this point, Mr. O'Keefe is asystolic, meaning he has no cardiac activity. That is the temperature of his body at the time that he was taken to, that he was examined by EMS and taken to the hospital. So it is a very hypothermic temperature. It is well below the 95 degrees, which we consider hypothermia.
Now, I believe you alluded to it earlier in your testimony, but with respect to hypothermia, what are some of the manifestations of that type of onset as it progresses?
Well, the first evidence of hypothermia, which we have no problem in this room, is shivering. When someone starts to get cold, they start to shiver to conserve heat. But then as the body loses more and more heat, there are neurologic consequences. People can get confused. We see this in the elderly all the time. They can get disoriented, and eventually at very low temperatures, below 90 degrees, everything ceases to function. The heart stops.
And would physical weakness be a lack of strength be one of those manifestations as well?
Yes.
And how many different sort of stages of hypothermia are there from the beginning of or onset of progression to the end?
There is mild hypothermia to extreme severe hypothermia.
I may have a moment, John.
Yes.
Oh, Lally, even on 1.5. Lord help us all. Look at Liza Little.
Now, with regards, as far as the type of clothing that someone is wearing when they're outside in these types of conditions, what, if any, relationship would that have with regard to the quickness or the rapidity of the onset of hypothermia?
Clearly, the more layers someone has,
That's a good one.
the slower they will lose heat from their body. The fewer layers, the faster they can become hypothermic.
And what, if any, information did you have as far as how Mr. O'Keefe was dressed when he was found in the snow on the morning of the 29th?
The information that I was given stated that he was wearing a pair of jeans and a long sleeve shirt.
Now, with respect
And a hoodie.
to
Well,
someone as far as that
T-shirt,
hypothermia,
a
onset
hoodie,
of it,
and his jeans.
what, if any, relationship would
And
the
baseball.
condition of the clothing? What I'm asking there is more so the dryness versus wet clothing. What, if any, relationship with that?
Well, again, wet clothing or wet conditions will speed up the rate at which the body loses heat.
Now, lastly, with regard to this area, Doctor, in regard to Ms. O'Keefe having sort of alcohol on board in the system at the time the hypothermia onsets, what, if any, relationship does that have in respect to the onset of
This is
hypothermia
hard.
and the rapidity of that?
Alcohol intoxication, it has been shown to inhibit some of the mechanisms that the body uses to maintain heat. So it's definitely a factor that is a negative factor when it comes to hypothermia.
May I approach?
Yes.
It's my opinion, guys, that it didn't take that long. Like, no way it took that many hours, 6 hours for Officer John O'Keefe to get down to 80 degrees.
Doctor, I'm telling you a two-page document. You can just review that, look up when you're finished. Do you
Yes.
recognize that, Doctor?
I do. It is a photocopy of the exam notes that I took at the time of autopsy.
Oh, this is important. Oh, sorry, guys. We're almost done. I just want to show us this and we're good.
He was weighed by our staff as 216 pounds and measuring 73 inches, which is 6 feet 1 inch.
Okay, I don't even care. Hold on. I don't care what she says.
Using the laser pointer before you.
But it's important that we look at this, babes. Do you see that she wrote that he has orbital ecchymosis? And she says that he has a laceration to the right eyelid. Okay, interesting. Then she says ecchymosis to his left eye. And she says that he had ETT, his endotracheal tube, and he had a C-call on. Why? Because he was having, like, at the time where she received him, unfortunately, he passed away while receiving, resuscitative efforts at Good Samaritan Hospital. So now we see, she says that he had a 3.5 centimeter laceration to the back of his head. And she's saying that he had abrasions on his right upper extremity, which we knew, but also left upper extremity abrasions. Very interesting. Then he had his ECG tickets. His color was gray. Okay, that's unalive. And he had natural teeth. Oh, he had brown hair, short, and it was texture straight.
Directing their attention to what, if anything, you observed in the.
And then, okay, here we go. Here we go.
With
Okay, so then she writes a 3 centimeter abrasion, and then she says ID. I don't know what she's. ID bracelet. Oh my God, ID Kim. Oh, she's new. Okay. Then there was faint abrasions on the left hand, and there was a 2 centimeter contusion on his right dorsum, which is huge. There was no absolutely was no IV access that was attempted in the field or at the hospital. Why? Because again, Officer John O'Keefe did not have a pulse. He also did not, he was hypothermic. So there would be no way that his his vein been open for them to get any sort of peripheral line. He had a Foley calf and let's go down. Oh, okay. Lower extremities.
He's
Okay. Okay. Then we know that he had right and left. I don't know. She's saying fourth and fifth metatarsal. I don't know. And then he had a cut. Oh no, he had that. No, I lied. That was just where he had the IO was placed in front of in the knee or near the knee, right? Right below it. He had clothing, he had socks on, and that is it. No injuries there. No, we did the scars. And he is male. We know that. So very interesting, guys. This was good to go over the test. I'll take pictures of that because people had not seen that or they hadn't remembered that. And this is the biggest part of her entire testimony is we always want to look at what your documentation was, and not much of it is shared in court, or it wasn't at least on the projection screen, in my opinion, during the initial trial. So I think it behooves the defense, and it actually behooves the prosecution if they have if they are trying to get some sort of representation here that could describe to the jury what they believe happened, what their theory is. Because I'm going to tell you this right now. There is no way Officer John O'Keefe struck his head on allegedly frozen ground in January that caught without some kind of projectile, protruding up from the ground, a boulder, a freaking I don't even know whatever else that was blunt that could have lacerated the back of his skull and then caused the extensive fractures and his brain damage that he sustained. Won't add up, okay? Makes 0 sense. There was also so much more surface area. I always say this. If his head were to hit the ground, why was it just 2 inches that lacerated? There was way more than 2 inches touching the ground. Every part of motion, right? We know that in physics, it's ever an opposite reaction, right? It does not make sense that only that part that contacted with the ground made that laceration. Okay, I'm off my high horse. Okay, it's almost 9 o'clock. Let me just bang it through and say hello to our humans. Oh, Mary Malaki, tell me it's bigger than Dave's. Sometimes size does matter. I don't know what we are talking about right now, Mary Malaki, but I will. Oh, it feels fresh. I don't even know. It's bigger than Dave's. I'll just say it. And Lisa Buckley, thank you so much, Lovey. Oh, and then Sarah Saka, thank you so much for becoming a member. And KLM says, hi, Kim, Joe Flipahead put together another great video this morning. I love the way both of you are using testimony straight from the trial. KLM, absolutely obsessed with you. I will be doing another one on either. I had Anthony Flamati and I also had Justin Rice, the ER doc. I want to go medical because that's my jam. Stay in your lane, bitch, and know what you're good at. Okay. And Donna Rocha, thank you so much, Lovey, for your super sticker. And Jen Fox says, we are Nurse Kimaholics. Oh my gosh. Lovey Nation. I can't even. Okay. And then we have our, if you know, you know, thank you so much for your super sticker and or super chat. It says, I am here as an RN to support you 100%. I have your back. Thank you so much. Please know that I wouldn't be here otherwise. Free Karen Reed and justice for Enrique Delgado Garcia. Thank you so much. And if you know, said, oh, we did that one about the Irini Scordi-Bello. Brit happens, my littlest love. P.S. Brit, that was an incredible show you did with DJ. I'm so proud of you. Smart and pretty. I can't wait until you are on YouTube. You will do so wonderfully. Brit says, please smash that like button for our girl nurse Kim. And as an RN, I think she sat on the, oh, well, geez, oh my gosh, I keep going back. If I could turn back time. Okay, Dewey, thank you so much, says, I heard or read a comment that KR Section 12 was forced by the police to keep her out of the way. Any truth to that? Well, here is the truth, Bess, is that she did a voluntary Section 12. She did not actually have to have an order, because she would have had to stay for 72 hours. If a physician in the emergency room had deemed her an actual risk to herself or others, Daniel Whitley, one of the EMTs, said, Karen, you can do this the easy way, or we can do this the hard way. We're going to either capture your ass for 72 hours, or you can come in, get evaluated, and then hopefully be released to the community if you are no longer posing a risk to your safety. And she decided to, like, clearly, I don't want to be on a 72-hour hold. So I don't know what the risk or if the police were trying to keep her out of the way per se. She was on her way back to One Meadow. Carrie Roberts was taking her little ass back, and then they got called back to the scene, which would have never happened. Also, just sidebar, as a registered nurse in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, that is such a no-no that it doesn't matter how you slice it. You go to a patient doesn't go to you. In that time that it took Kerry to get from on the road en route back to One Meadow, Karen could have been hurt or hurt somebody else. That does not happen that way. And I have no idea why protocol was not conducted the way that it is, and why we have standards of care. You know, we have, woo, but I don't know, do we? And then if you know, says, from an RN perspective, he was not hit by a car. He was beat. The arm injuries were from a dog, and Chloe was long gone at 6 a.m. No dog would not be barking. Give me a break. That a lot of people have said that. And when Jennifer McCabe went upstairs to go wake up her brother-in-law and sister, Brian and Nicole Albert, she couldn't even place the, she wasn't able to say, oh, I saw Chloe upstairs. She didn't recall. And thank you so much, Joseph Kane, for gifting one Nurse Kim membership. I appreciate you, Lovey. And my love, Romy with cheese, says, was the ground frozen? Honestly, I can't remember. I thought their theory was it wasn't, and OJO's blood seeped into the unfrozen ground. Love a Romy with cheese. Let me tell you something. That's why you are the smartest and the prettiest of them all, okay? You can't have it both ways, Commonwealth. You can't do it. We got to pick a lane, okay? So here is how it goes. Either the ground was frozen and caused Officer John O'Keefe to sustain brain damage and cranial fractures and injuries that led to his untimely and tragic death because it was so frozen. Or B, the ground soaked up the blood that was lost at the scene by Officer John O'Keefe. Can't be both. Oxymoron, right? So smart, Romy. If you know, you know. I'm an RN and I agree with the med professional that FKR. Yes. And all of these people, if you know, you know, thank you so much again. All of these people were raging alcoholics. Let's be real about these people. That is interesting because that was actually kind of documented in the Vanity Fair article, right? When Karen said, we were leaning on alcohol a little bit too much, and that life kind of revolves around alcohol with many of these people. And that is something that is very true. Karen didn't, if you know, you know, thank you again, love. And she said, Karen didn't want to go there. She tried to push back with having the plumber coming. He made her feel bad, and she ended up going to be his DD. Yeah, that is a way you could look at it. Absolutely. Because of their conversations. And if you know, says, as an RN, I am with you 100%. Thank you for being with me, Lovey. And Nurse Kim, your microphone in relationship to, is it bigger than Dave's? Okay, let's take a look. Listen, I'm hoping that it might be compact, but as they say, it'll get the job done. Okay, moving on. Stop it. Get out of here. Okay, and Mrs. Parks is in the house. Thank you so much, Lovey. Have you seen the Auntie Deb parody that came out today? My new favorite. I love you. Let me tell you something. That is a Spotify greatest hits. I was singing it, and also Aunt Deb did make a small TikTok of me reacting to that, and it is chef's kiss, cousins for life. All right, lovies, I'll let you go. You have the best night ever. Be safe. Love each other. And thank you for answering my FaceTime. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.